Can you imagine for a moment two native English speakers living in an English majority country, say two Canadians living in Australia or the United States or England, who raise a child who doesn't speak a word of English, only say Arabic or Chinese? That would be the most ridiculous thing you could imagine. It's impossible. It wouldn't happen. It can't happen. How could two native English speakers living in an English country raise a child who doesn't speak English? And yet, and please understand, this is not a judgment against these people. This is a sad remark about the state of affairs in the world today. That I have met many children whose parents are both native Arabic speakers and who live in Arab majority societies and who speak only English, or in Arabic majority societies such as Morocco, and who speak only French. This is a rather common occurrence. Now, I am somebody who's learned Arabic, who loves Arabic, who's learned Spanish, who learned basic Haitian Creole, right? I don't find anything wrong with learning languages. Moroccans and Saudis and Jordanians and Canadians, and everybody should be learning many, many languages. But to live in the country where people speak the language of your ancestors, and you speak the language of the imperial center, this is a state of affairs we need to really think about as Muslims.
Let me offer you a decolonial analysis of the situation I have just exposed to you. Now, to begin, I wish to make it perfectly clear that my focus here is not on governments. It's not on what governments have done or should do or should be doing. My focus here is on the human as Muslim human beings living in communities. What are the challenges that face us, and how can we continue to respond to them? Because we have been responding, and we must continue to respond to them. But in order to do so, we need to understand what is happening. So let me emphasize once again, make it perfectly clear, that the people who are in this situation I'm speaking about, that is the situation in which they speak a foreign language, but do not speak the language of their own ancestors in a country in which the language of their ancestors is the dominant language. This is a state of alienation, right? This produces a state of alienation for which there's no reason to blame them. They are doing their best in what I can call a colonial situation. And in order to understand why I call this a colonial situation, we need to understand the term coloniality. Coloniality is a term which was coined by the Latin American scholar Aníbal Quijano, colonialidad, right? Which coloniality refers to the power dynamics installed, right, by colonial regimes, direct colonial rule, particularly by Western powers in the modern colonial world system. There's two things we need to understand is, first of all, coloniality affects even those places which were not or are not directly colonized. So, for example, in a world system in which you have dominant colonial powers such as England, France, Spain, Portugal, etc., even countries which bravely resisted occupation, such as many parts of the Arabian Peninsula, much of what is today Ethiopia was never colonized, right? Much of what is today Iran was never colonized, also Turkey and many other parts of the world. But that is not to say that the modern colonial world system did not affect them, that they were not affected by coloniality. And the other thing we need to know about coloniality is that it survives, in fact, it has survived, the end of most colonial administrations in the global South and East in the mid-20th century. So while the world can no longer be called, right, we can no longer say of the global system that it is under, most of the world right now is under direct European or Western colonial rule, we can say that Western-centric coloniality survives in the contemporary world. Okay, so having understood what coloniality is, we could also now venture to analyze the situation I'm speaking about as an attempt for people, right, to deal with the colonial situations, the ongoing colonial situations in which they exist. And therefore, we quite understand that people who want to get ahead in life and do well would want their children to speak the dominant language of the age, which for most of the world is English. Now, in certain countries, for example, in North and West Africa, French has been the language of colonial power, or Spanish in the very, very north part of Morocco and parts of the Sahara Desert in the south. But globally speaking, English is the dominant language, and there always has been dominant languages, for many millennia right now, in which Arabic played the role of a dominant language. Persian did for many parts of the world. Ottoman Turkish did, right? Latin, Greek, etc. And this is not a problem in and of itself. I think if we want to have a cosmopolitan world, it is understandable that many people should be trying to learn the dominant language so that they can communicate with one another and have access to the instruments of power and knowledge of their day. The problem is when we no longer have access to our own traditions, because Islam, for example, has long been a tradition, right, which has been practiced by people in so many contexts, from so many backgrounds, so many cultures, so many linguistic backgrounds. And it was very, very common from the very beginning of Islam for Muslims to speak many languages, right? You think of the great scholars and the great figures of Islamic history, many of them spoke Persian, Arabic, perhaps Turkish, right? Or Mongolian, right? This is not a problem. Perhaps Amazigh, perhaps Nubian, right? So to speak the language of the centers of power is one thing, but to not speak your own language is another thing. And when your own language is Arabic, this is another point I want to make, it's even more problematic from an Islamic point of view, because Islam is the worldview of 2 billion people in the world. It is the only global counter civilization, or alternative civilization, I should say, to Western civilization. It doesn't mean that we need to be in conflict, but it is the only counter discourse to Western-centric modernity, the only other globalized civilization. And the central language of Islam is Arabic. It is the language in which we believe Allah revealed his final message to humanity, and it is the language in which our beloved Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him, right, communicated with us. So it's not any language which is being sacrificed here. It is the beautiful language which is at the center of our intellectual, spiritual, and civilizational tradition.
We are in the process of decolonizing the world. We're moving towards a new world system, a new arrangement. The transfer of wealth is now going towards Asia and Africa, right? The West is still rich, but it is no longer the only player on the block, and it is no longer hoarding the majority of the wealth of the world. And that means that things are changing. And we need to be taking advantage of this opportunity. We need to be teaching our children Arabic. The late medieval Moroccan traveler, perhaps the greatest explorer of all time, Ibn Battuta, he traveled around the entire Islamic world, from the northwestern tip of Africa all the way into Southeast Asia, and everywhere he went, he was basically able to find people to speak to him in Arabic, right? Now, these people, everywhere he went, did not all speak Arabic as their native tongue. Arabic has to be, for the Muslim, one of the languages. I'm sorry, this is an absolute necessity, all right? And if we don't learn to respect ourselves and our own tradition, how can we expect to explain to people such as expats living everywhere around the world, including in the Arabic world, who think it's perfectly natural to work in a university or a school or a company, right? And not ever learn the language of the land. I've seen the English teachers coming from all parts of the world, and I've seen them in all parts of the world. These are people who love language. They're teachers of language. They're trying to encourage people to learn another language, yet they will live in Japan or Saudi Arabia or Morocco for 15, 20, 25 years and never get basic proficiency in the language of the land. Well, let me ask you this. Have you ever seen an Arabic or a Chinese, right, professor teaching Arabic or Chinese in a Canadian or a British university or an American university who after 15, 20, 25 years doesn't speak basic English? It's not possible. It can't happen. So we need to be, right, taking advantage of the situation in which we are and reclaiming our tradition with an open mind. This is a great, great opportunity for us because as Muslims, we are a multilinguistic, right, multicultural, right, pluralistic nation, community of nations and peoples, right? You go to Morocco, right, to the souks, and you'll find little children getting by in 3, 4, 5 languages. Same thing in Cairo, right? So our problem is not with languages. Our problem is with completing the process of decolonization. And I would say more importantly, as individual Muslims, we need to understand this process is happening, right? The Gulf area, for example, is now an optimistic place, undergoing a great transformation, and it is, right, doing so in a way which leverages Asia and Africa and Europe and North America in a way in which is non-confrontational, but definitely one in which the Arabs and the Muslims are taking their position in the world. And the same thing can be said for my beloved Morocco, right? It is becoming increasingly strategically placed, and the multilingual skills of the people in these countries is an asset. So let's finish the job.